Well. Google Data Studio is now Looker Studio. But what does that mean for you? In this video, I'm going to dive into why Google has changed the name of Data Studio to Looker Studio. I'll explore their announcement of Looker Studio Pro and explain what you're likely to get with a paid subscription and explain what Looker is, like the regular Looker, the Looker that ultimately led Google down this name change path. And just to clarify, we, collective we as in us marketers, now have Looker Studio Pro, and Looker. Why has Google changed Data Studio to Looker Studio? Back in June 2019, Google announced it was acquiring a data analytics scale-up called Looker for $2.6 billion. Yes, that's a lot of cash. The deal was then finalized in early 2020, meaning Google had added a new arm to their growing Google Cloud platform. I'll talk a bit more about the Looker that Google purchased in the next section. But essentially by 2021, Looker gained about 2,000 customers, meaning it was becoming a serious player in the data and analytics market. As Looker gained traction as a go-to data and analytics platform for larger businesses, Google Data Studio remained the reporting choice for millions of small and mid-market businesses. Namely because unlike Looker, it is and always has been free. But that's just it. Google Data Studio had a huge user base. Looker, on the other hand, only had about 2,000, but Looker's users were paying users, and Data Studios weren't. And because Google is still like every other company and need to figure out how to make more money, they saw a huge non-paying user base that they wanted to try and monetize. So they created a natural path to monetization that starts for free in Google Data Studio, or rather Looker Studio, and ends with a paid subscription to Looker, with a potential stop along the way in Looker Studio Pro. Not only do all roads lead to a paid subscription to Looker, but Looker also runs on BigQuery, which also charges on data consumption, meaning that as all roads point to a paid subscriptions in Looker, they also point to more revenue from BigQuery consumption. Smart. For the rest of the video, I want you to think of the three platforms on a data and analytics maturity scale, with Looker Studio at one end and Looker on the other. So, to make that path more obvious and allow for more integration and collaboration opportunities, they renamed Google Data Studio to Looker Studio. What is Looker? As I said, Looker was founded in 2012 and by 2020 had sold themselves to the Goog for a whopping $2.6 billion. Happy days for those founders. Okay. To understand what Looker is in relation to Looker Studio and Looker Studio Pro, I wanted to go through how they position themselves in a huge data and analytics market, and then explain what kind of companies use it. And to help you understand its value, I'll let you know about how we use Looker at the funnel. On their website, Looker helps with, and I quote, business intelligence, big data analytics, or a 360-degree view of your customers. Sounds like a very copywritten sentence to me. What I will say is that from experience, nailing your positioning in 12 words is pretty good going. But what does that actually mean? Well, it means that they help businesses with their BI and analytics, integrated insights, data-driven workflows, and custom apps. Let's break each one of those down. BI and analytics. Business intelligence is thrown around a lot, but in this context, it means helping businesses create real-time dashboards that can be used to analyze key business data by giving teams access to consistent data. By the way, I'm going to run through each one of these, but don't worry if they don't hit home, as I'm going to bring them all together in a second. Integrated insights. What this is referring to is bringing your various data sources together from a data warehouse like BigQuery. Although you can have multiple data sources in Looker Studio, that isn't really what it was built for, so it struggles with this at scale. Data-driven workflows. Invigorate your workflows with fresh, reliable data. Looker can give teams unified access to answers they need to help drive successful outcomes. Custom applications. Create custom apps that can deliver data experiences as unique as your business. Looker's embedded analytics solution from retail to healthcare can give your customers the data they need to get the job done. I sort of feel like a Looker account manager at the moment or something. With that said, to understand Looker and how it facilitates the above, we have to talk about LookML for a second. LookML is a modeling language, which means it functions as the glue between the front end and the back end. It controls what you see in the Explorer and how that translates into SQL code when you run a query, essentially the step between an interface that functions without code and the code that actually makes the thing happen. You can think of it like any app you use. On the front end, you click something, and on the back end, that click is translated into code and makes something happen, so you then see something else on the front end. In this case, LookML allows data teams to define the calculations and relationships of a data warehouse and expose that in a simpler format that allows businesses and business users to build their own dashboards without having to write the SQL code, because I don't want to do that. Again, thinking about your favorite apps, they are built on the back end by someone, not to allow you to do anything you want on the front end, but within the guardrails of what that back end has been created to allow you to do. Take Instagram, for example. You can't build a website on Instagram because, well, they didn't build it for that. But you can post pictures to your story and your feed because they built it as such. The same goes here. The data teams create guardrails and business users operate within them to explore the data as they wish without moving or altering those guardrails. You use LookML to define explorers, which I just want to point out is actually similar to Funnels Data Explorer. Explorers allow users to choose between available dimensions and metrics and combine them to answer questions from the data and visualize the result. The LookML translates that user-friendly UI to SQL code that runs in the underlying data warehouse. Here you can see a Looker Explorer showing the number of BigQuery exports from Funnel per month in the last 60 months. As you can see, the more customers we add, the more BigQuery exports are created. What you then see here is the SQL that gets run in the underlying BigQuery data warehouse to answer that question, which is translated by LookML into the graph, all without me, the business user, writing any code. LookML is a modeling language and therefore it can be treated as code. This is another game changer in the data analytics space because it allows data teams to adapt tools and processes from their older siblings, the software engineers. Long ago, software engineers had to figure out how to build stable and scalable products with hundreds of engineers making changes to the same underlying code base. You can think of it as a bunch of people painting their small part of a huge picture of a tree the size of a football pitch and trying to make sure the end product looks like a tree and not as a big collection of different pictures that actually don't look anything like a tree. So why does this matter for understanding Looker Studio, Looker Studio Pro, and Looker? LookML, like the JavaScript that powers a website or an app, is controlled through Git. This allows data teams to roll back changes that might have had unforeseen consequences like, why did all my dashboards break? It allows several people to work on the same code without chaos. That's because they all work on different branches that eventually gets merged into the production branch. Think of it like a tree. At some point, you can trace everything back to the trunk. I challenge you right now not to be thinking of a huge picture of a tree covering like a football pitch or something. Amanda, have some fun with that. Fundamentally, this guarantees a single source of truth for your data and business logic. It's an elegant solution to the age-old problem in business intelligence of everyone coming to meeting with a slightly different definition of what an active user is. Well, because they're all working independently, building their own logic. Ultimately, Looker is a cloud-based data visualization tool that has some really powerful and complex functionality. It also integrates really well with other data and analytics tools, meaning if you use it correctly, you can create a really powerful environment to consume valuable and connected business data. So what kind of companies use Looker? I've been hinting at the complexity and power of Looker, which means it's typically used in more complex data use cases, which also typically corresponds to scale and thus size. This means that Looker at the moment is more for companies on the larger end of the spectrum with lots of complexity. Look at a company like Samsung. They have a bunch of tools in their stack, including Funnel, by the way. But the thing with Samsung is that they have data coming from so many places. They have various markets, various business units, various methods of selling their various products, like infinite complexity. In fact, Samsung is so infinitely complex that you could probably make use of Looker in some way. I'm not entirely sure if they do, but it wouldn't surprise me. How do we use Looker at Funnel? I think the best way to understand Looker is for me to explain how we use Looker here at Funnel. For context, we're a 320-person fast growth software company with offices in Stockholm, Boston, Dublin, and London. So we aren't a startup, nor are we a huge publicly traded company, but we are a data company, and being data-driven is in our DNA. As you can see, Looker sits as an end destination where we primarily do two things. One, combine data from different parts of the organization, and two, consume data in tables, dashboards, and looks. Let me walk you through our monthly marketing dashboard that contains data from Funnel, which includes marketing data, budget data, and HubSpot data. Marketing is an integral part of our business and helped contribute to our incredible 70% year-on-year growth. Given that marketing is so important, we have to have a solid reporting structure that can tell us what we've got in return for our marketing investments. In this dashboard, you can see data for the month of October. I've blurred out the y-axis so you can't actually see all of our super sensitive business data, but what you can see is what each chart visualizes, like spend versus budget, or how many hand raisers we've got versus our target, or the cost per acquisition of a hand raiser, etc., etc. But what is cool with Looker, and what I mentioned earlier, is that if I click on Explore from here, I can essentially start looking into the numbers behind this chart and decide to slice and dice them in a different way. Think of it like when you have a Google Sheets graph linked in a deck and you can open that sheet that's connected and check out the data. It's the same principle, but way more powerful, as this data is all connected, unlike a Google Sheet where each sheet or data set is siloed. And I know, yes, you can connect sheets with formulas, but that's not very scalable and it gets messy very quickly. As I mentioned earlier, although I'm free to explore here, I can only explore within the boundaries that the team responsible for our Looker setup have created. Again, if it was a Google Sheet, besides locking sheets, I'm pretty free to break or change whatever I want. Sticking with that Google Sheet analogy, hypothetically, there may be a calculation for budget that pulls from a couple of other sheets, and I might decide that we should include some other test budgets from last month, even though someone else doesn't think that those test budgets should be included, in the official dashboards. Because there are no real guardrails, I could go ahead and just change that. Here in Looker, I'm free to explore and say take a closer look at spend, but only within the boundaries created by the team responsible for setting up Looker. To keep things simple, maybe I want to look at spend by traffic source to break down what I've spent on each channel. So I click Explore from here. Now I just need to hide a couple of things so this visualization is a bit simpler. So I hide 7-day average from visualization and do the same with budgeted cost. Then I search for traffic source on the left here. The interesting part of Looker that is different from, say, Google Sheets is that I have so many available fields here because the team responsible for setting up Looker have piped in data from all over the business. In this case, traffic source comes mapped together from Funnel, so the data is nice and clean. So once I have traffic source, I just click on this little arrow which pivots the data on this new field, which is another way of segmenting or slicing the data. I then change the graph to a column view and hit run. With Looker, every time I hit run, it's processing tons of data on the back end. So you see here in this, it's a great example of LookML in action. I have this smooth front-end interface where I'm choosing what I want to see, then LookML is translating that into SQL code and running it in the backend in BigQuery to pull data from various tables to produce a nice visualization. Once it's run, you can see I have this nice stacked bar chart showing Facebook spend in blue, Google Ad spend in green, LinkedIn spend in yellow, plus a few other smaller channels labeled as other displayed in gray. This was just a quick example of how we use Looker in our daily work, but it is literally used all over the business in every single team. It contains an abundance of valuable data, and I always say that's where the juicy stuff is, because I can combine data from various different parts of the business and really dig into it. Cue like a spade or something. What is Looker Studio Pro, and what are the benefits of upgrading? Now you know what Looker Studio and Looker are, let's talk about the newest kid on the block, Looker Studio Pro. As I mentioned, Looker Studio Pro is intended to bridge the gap between Looker Studio and Looker. Google wants companies to eventually mature into Looker, but the gap between Looker Studio and Looker is quite large. Looker involves much more data infrastructure and maintenance, and as I explained, is way more powerful, making it a whole different beast altogether than Looker Studio. So, like a lot of companies out there, Google wants users to start with Looker Studio for free, and then when they mature, upgrade and buy Looker Studio Pro. But what will you actually get for upgrading? Well, at the moment, it's pretty unclear because at the time of recording, Looker Studio Pro is still in closed alpha testing, meaning you have to manually submit a request to give it a try, then Google will decide if you're a good candidate. What we do know is what Google have released, but this is Google and things can move fast. I mean, just look at GA4. When it was first released, it looked entirely different than it does today. So, according to what Google has said, it looks like Looker Studio Pro is going to focus on collaboration, which I assume is their bet on Looker Studio taking organizations towards a more centralized reporting system rather than a siloed, decentralized reporting system. But what does that mean? Google calls this the ability to manage access to content at scale through two new features called Team Workspaces and Google Cloud Project Linking. Let's unpack those a little. Team Workspaces is essentially permission functionality for a centralized team or owner to control who can do what with reports and data sources in Looker Studio. Google Cloud Project Linking enables a centralized place for all of your reports to live. You can imagine that with Looker Studio, storage works a little like Google Drive in that reports live in a bit of a messy drive that does have permission settings, but no great way of managing permissions at scale from a centralized place. But with Looker Studio Pro, all of a sudden there's a centralized place for reports to be organized and easily accessible, even when, individual contributors leave, all fit with project level permissions. The last feature of Looker Studio Pro that has already been teased is some level of support to help businesses get the most out of Looker Studio Pro. A feature that can be looked at as a sort of pre-sales qualification, as Google account managers will build relationships with the maturing businesses so they can successfully sell them on the power of Looker when the time is right and prevent them from leaving to other competitors. Collaboration is intended to push organizations up the data analytics and maturity framework. With Looker Studio, reporting is more siloed, and the platform isn't really built for collaboration and centralized analytics. Then hopefully you've got from my explanation with Looker Studio Pro, you start to take steps toward centralization, likely with a team owning processes and permissions. And finally, with something like Looker, you really need to have some real ownership of the various data streams into Looker and permissions, processes, systems, strategy, etc. That's because when you do implement Looker, you increase complexity, and with complexity comes more investment and deeper analytics. You can start to see what I was explaining earlier about Looker Studio Pro being created to bridge the gap between a simple data and analytics tool like Looker Studio and a more complex tool like Looker. Our verdict is that at the moment, it's hard to gauge the extra value of Looker Studio Pro because it truly is in its infancy. But what will be interesting to see is whether Google decides to move some advanced features of Looker Studio up into Looker Studio Pro and/or move some of the paid features of Looker down into Looker Studio Pro at a more reasonable price, sort of creating a longer, wider bridge capable of transporting more users from Looker Studio into Looker. What I will say is that the power of LookML, I think Looker's $2.6 billion price tag will eventually turn out to be a really smart play. So there you have it. You now know why Google Data Studio is now Looker Studio, what Looker Studio Pro is, and what Looker is, and how companies use it. If you found this video useful, subscribe where you'll get more videos about digital marketing best practices, marketing data and analytics, and data visualization tips and tricks. All of the great content you need to shortcut your way to being a better marketer.